Hey, hey, hey! Welcome to another online lesson. Today we'll be talking about the Iroquois Confederacy, also known as the people of the Longhouse. Hopefully you've already pre-read through your sheet for this online lesson. Let's get started. So we're going to begin today's online lesson with looking at how geography impacted the Iroquois nation, whether it's through trade, whether it's through the houses they built, what they ate, their customs, how geography impacted them. So for instance, paths and rivers were used as highways for traveling, trading, and hunting, and this is across all of the Iroquois nations. Also, Native Americans of the eastern woodlands, which is where the Iroquois lived, traded with other tribes within their region or nation. And as I mentioned earlier, the natural environments, the geography of a place where these early groups lived had a huge impact on what they lived in and what they used for housing and shelter. The Iroquois lived in longhouses, and these houses were built by using wood, using trees, using bark, all sorts of the natural resources that were in their environment. They were built about 150 feet long and 20 feet wide. And within each one of these longhouses would be about 12 or more families in just one single longhouse. Geography also impacts what people eat. And in this area of the United States, and predominantly it was in New York State, there was very fertile soil. And so the Iroquois diet heavily consisted of the Three Sisters. These were a farming community. That's where they got most of their food. And the Three Sisters are known as corn, beans, and squash. And they also ate wildlife, fish, berries, grapes, and nuts, as well as fruits that were available around, and each village tried to grow or make everything, again, with a big emphasis on farming in this community. So moving on, I'd like to stop and take a quick look at the role of women in an Iroquois society. The Iroquois was a matriarchal, or were a matriarchal society, and women held positions of power and leadership. They named children, they owned property, and they directed civilian activities, such as activities that were going on in a village or between two villages at one point in time. So the women really had the last say in a lot of decisions. For instance, even today, when my father has to go and visit one of the Iroquois nations that's not too far from here for his job, he needs to get permission from the chief, but the chief needs to run it past one of the mothers who really have the power. The Iroquois also had extended families, and these would include grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. The family was usually headed by the eldest woman. So during the early time of the Iroquois, up until about 1570, they were made up of 5 separate tribes. Not together, they were separated. They included the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and the Mohawk. And until the late 1500s, these tribes were frequently at war with one another. So after being at war with one another for many, many years, these nations began to consider banding together to form a confederation. The whole idea that if we're together, we'll be stronger than we are separately. And the legend of Hiawatha tells us how these tribes were eventually united. And the whole idea of one arrow by itself, easy to break. 5 arrows bound together, much stronger. So that idea of safety in numbers, if they're united, they will be able to protect each other, protect their ways of life, protect their families, and their land, and live out their daily lives. So the major motivation for the Union was to enforce peace among the tribes, but there were still other factors that existed, such as the Iroquois wanting to set up a system of power and responsibility, where everyone looked out for one another, create a united front against the white man when the settlers arrived later on, and make the Iroquois a powerful nation with a strong culture. And because of this confederation, these 5 tribes, the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk, all bound together, they were able to keep control of their land for about 150 years after the first white settlers arrived. At first, they managed to coexist with the French. However, in time, things began to change. So as the Iroquois and these new settlers, predominantly from France, began to intermingle with one another, European countries, the French, took steps to dissolve this Iroquois Confederacy. They allied themselves with the Algonquin, who were the hated enemies of the Iroquois. And wars with Europeans and their Native American allies led to the death. And as the Iroquois had more and more exposure to Europeans, the contact resulted in tribes being exposed to new diseases that they could not fight. The Native American immune system could not fight against smallpox, TB, and influenza viruses. Thousands would lose their lives. And eventually, Iroquois religion it begins to show traces of Christianity, and because the Europeans are trying to convert the Native Americans, especially the Iroquois, and their culture began to change. And eventually the Europeans would drive all tribes, including the Iroquois, off of their lands and force them onto reservations. That about wraps things up for today. I hope you enjoyed this online lesson. Have a great day.